Hello, and welcome to this single scoop episode. I'm JR, and today I'm joined by my boyfriend, Cass.
What's up?
In this episode, we will be discussing the 2018 movie entitled Swing Kids. As always, there may be some spoilers discussed, so come back to this episode later if you haven't seen the movie yet. Okay, so before we get into what we liked and disliked, we're going to talk a little bit about the plot, some basic background info about production, and a little bit about the actors and actresses in the movie. This movie is set in 1951, and it follows a ragtag group of dancers formed in the Goje prison camp during the Korean War. Jackson, a black former Broadway dancer, takes on the seemingly impossible task of teaching prisoners of war how to tap dance at the behest of his commander. Jackson is told that if he manages to do so, it'll make the prison camp and the commander look good, and in turn, Jackson can be sent back to Japan to find his girlfriend that he was forced to leave behind. Through some amusing antics, a wrongfully convicted South Korean, a Chinese, and a North Korean prisoner of war, along with a young female civilian, who's also the group's translator, come together and share in their love of dance and the hope it gives them for a freer future.
This movie is based on a musical, named for the main character, called Rogisu by Jang Woo-sung. It looks like performances started in 2015, went on for about a month, and then the following year in 2016, they had 2 months of performances. An interesting thing to note is that none of the songs from the show were carried over, just the plot and the dance aspects. Also, even though the stage show had crossover with screen actors, none of those actors appeared in the movie. It was released on December 19th, 2018. It had a budget of about $13 million, but unfortunately only made about $11 million at the box office. However, it still passed over 1 million attendees at the theater, so that's usually a good indicator of a movie's reception. Finally, it did win a handful of awards, mostly technical, but Dio and Park Hae-soo both received one each for their acting. Kang Hyung-chul wrote and directed the movie. He is known for often working with Cha Tae-hyun on movies like Scandal Makers and Taza, The Hidden Card.
Next, we'll talk about notable actors/idols of note. The main character, North Korean prisoner of war Ro Gi-soo, is played by Dio, one of the main vocalists of the boy group EXO. He has been in many movies and K-dramas over the years, but his most recent show is Bad Prosecutor, and his most recent movie is Secret, Untold Melody. Jared Grimes plays the other main character, Army officer and tap dancer extraordinaire, Sergeant Jackson. He is a highly esteemed Broadway performer and choreographer, and actually when we watched this movie, my sister watched along with us, and she recognized him from the TV show Manifest that came out a few years ago. So he's had a little bit of crossover between stage and screen. Park Hae-soo plays the young South Korean civilian Yang Pan-rae. Her character knows English, Japanese, and Mandarin, and acts as the group's translator. Park Hae-soo has a handful of roles under her belt, but her most recent is Dear M from 2022. Oh Jung-se plays Kang Byung-sam, a South Korean who is falsely accused of being a communist sympathizer. Oh Jung-se is a mainstay in K-dramas. You might have seen him in It's Okay to Not Be Okay. That came out like 5 years ago, but was a pretty big deal. Or the currently airing When Life Gives You Tangerines,
Which we are currently watching, and he's an amazing actor. Terrible person in the show.
Yeah.
You guys should definitely check it out because we're enjoying ourselves.
Completely agree. And last but not least, Kim Min-ho plays the final member of the tap troupe, Chinese soldier Zhao Fang. He has heart problems that make it difficult for him to dance for prolonged amounts of time, and that's kind of his bit throughout the movie. Kim has been in a handful of shows, but most recent is the 2023 show Duna. I also want to point out that for the most part, the white actors in this movie are not actually horrible. If you've ever seen a piece of Korean media, the people chosen to play white/Western characters are almost always the worst actors you have ever seen. And I don't know if it's because they tapped actual actors to play, because for example, the commander that we mentioned before, he's been in soap operas and film and all that stuff for many years. So maybe that's part of the reason they were better, but you won't watch this movie and cringe every time someone speaks, which is a welcome change.
And I thought that was very interesting when you mentioned it while we were watching the movie, because I clearly, through my expansive experience watching maybe 4 or 5 K-dramas in my time, whenever there was a white character or maybe an individual of non-Korean origin, I didn't necessarily think they were ever bad actors, but maybe they just didn't get enough screen time to justify. You know what I mean?
At this point, I have seen maybe into the hundreds of K-dramas. Not as many movies, for sure, but I have seen many K-dramas. And except for a handful of mainstay white / non-Korean actors, I would say the majority of the ones I have watched are not good. Again, welcome change to see people who can actually act.
I mean, I guess with the popularity that K-dramas and K-pop have both seen in recent years, I mean, I feel like there's always been a community for it over in the States and around the world, but it wasn't a common thing, at least from my perspective. I only started seeing a bunch of K-dramas appear on Netflix maybe a couple years ago. So as the popularity grows, I'm sure more and more people from around the world would absolutely love to be a part of them.
Yeah, for sure there's been an influx. So in a way, that's good, I guess. Just something I wanted to point out. All right, so now that all that background information is out of the way, let's talk about what we liked. One of my favorite parts of this movie, both the first time I watched it back when it came out in 2018 and then just a few days ago, is that the cinematography is so incredibly engaging. It has tons of visually interesting shots, and everything looks like it was set up with a purpose. It looks like it was storyboarded, which I feel like sometimes nowadays you watch something and you're like, I don't think they blocked that before they decided to shoot it. It looks a little off. So it's not just for beauty, but also for utility in regards to the story itself.
If you guys have ever seen a Guy Ritchie or Wes Anderson film, this movie really gave me that kind of vibe where every little detail was put in place for a specific reason, like you said. It's very snappy in a lot of places, and it just makes the audience feel incredibly engaged. You just can't pull your eyes off of the screen.
Because you might miss something. You might miss some clever trick of the camera or, something like that.
Didn't you say this movie was better upon a second viewing? Were there things that you were able to spot that you didn't notice before?
Not necessarily that. It came out in 2018, so it has been 7 years since... Oh, more than 7 years? It's been... Oh my goodness. It's been a long time since I have watched it. And I think the story is what stuck out to me more than the visuals at the time. And so watching it now, knowing the story, I was able to appreciate the visual aspects more, I think.
That makes sense.
One other thing I want to point out in the same vein is that it actually has color grading and good lighting. A lot of people have been complaining about how dull Western movies have been in the past few years. So if you want a palette cleanse, you should definitely check this movie out because it's quite vibrant for a war film.
Yeah, there's a distinct lack of a Mexico filter where it's all tan or the Middle East filter where it's incredibly vibrant, as you said. Again, it's just a beautiful film. So one of the parts of the movie that I really enjoyed is the character Jackson. He is my absolute favorite. Jarrett Grimes knocked it out of the park with this character. From his introduction all the way to the end of the film, he is almost like the soul of the movie. I think he's definitely the character audiences are going to relate to the most. He has a lot of struggles, he has a lot of highs and lows, and I feel like he has a really great character arc throughout the movie. Most of the characters in the movie all have their own goals that they're trying to achieve. And they all sort of change as the movie goes on. There's a lot of growth that happens there, and it's very satisfying to see them all develop.
Yeah, I would agree. Kind of piggybacking off of that, another thing I want to praise is Park Hae-soo's acting. Her character is the translator, as I've already mentioned, for the rest of the group, so she's often speaking English with Jackson. In particular, there's one scene where the two are talking about the hardship of war, and I was so impressed with her ability to act in a language, which from what I know is not her native language, because that is not easy. I did some research and I was trying to find out if she had any formal English training, if she lived in another country where English was spoken or anything like that. She was born in South Korea. So it's very possible that she just kept it from her school days or something like that. But regardless, as far as I know, it is not her native tongue. The fact that she was able to so clearly express herself in a language that was not her own just impressed me in every single scene she was in. Yeah, I mean, even in other K-dramas, I've seen people try to act in other languages, and it doesn't always meet expectations, I guess you could say. Sometimes it falls flat. So I was really impressed with her ability to do that. I think she's a really great actress, and if you want to see her in a K-drama, then I think you should check out Hello My 20s. That one is one of my favorites. I think she had something of like a bullying scandal a few years back. From what I saw, I think she was exonerated of it and that she was maybe the victim, but I think that's probably why she hasn't been in anything in the past few years. But yeah.
So one of the central themes of this movie is finding the humanity in other people, regardless of their beliefs or their position in the world, and just being able to appreciate them for who they are as a person. There are quite a few scenes where horrendous discrimination is put on display, and I think the two characters that experience the most of it are Jackson and Rogi-soo, once again played by Dio. Rogi-soo faces discrimination from the American soldiers, who just think of him as nothing but a communist soldier, and he's bullied quite often throughout the film. And Jackson, being an African American, he faces discrimination from those very same soldiers as well. And I think there were maybe one or two moments where both of them witnessed the sort of discrimination that they were both facing. And at least when I was watching the film, I feel like it was a great opportunity for the both of them to kind of see that they're almost in the same boat. It gave them something that they could use to find empathy for one another and see each other past just being a communist soldier and a United States soldier.
Yeah, I think that the movie does that really well. And they also do that on lesser levels with other characters. Because Jackson talks with Panre later on in the movie, and the two also discuss discrimination. And she's like, it's harder to be a South Korean woman. And he's like, well, you're not a black man in the United States Army. And they kind of like...
It's a very cute interaction.
Yeah. It sounds kind of silly saying it out loud, but when you watch it, you're like, you know what they're trying to get across with that commentary. I think the movie did a good job of being like, we all face our hardships, but there's a lot more we have in common than you would think, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Another thing I really enjoyed was the dancing. I've done a bit of research, and it looks like the dance crew definitely did their own dancing, which I find to be incredibly impressive. At least to my untrained eye, I'm not a professional by any means, so...
It serves the purpose for the average viewer watching the movie, I feel, because I was enthralled the entire time.
Yes, exactly. I found one article saying that Dio spent 5 months learning how to tap dance. And I know that the other members of the dance crew also took quite some time learning. And the final dance sequence looks so good. And it created incredible tension. And I feel like some people, they hear like the word musical or they hear the word play or something like that, and they immediately close off. And they're like, I don't want to engage with that. And I get it. However, I think this is an exception. I think this movie is an exception to that rule. And even if you don't like plays or musicals, you should try it out. Because the way that it is incorporated is unlike anything I've seen before. And I've seen a lot of musicals. I've seen a lot of movies. So, again, I'm no expert, but from my humble opinion, I think that it is worth the 2 hours to watch this film. Just because so much care was put into everything regarding it.
I think a lot of people are turned off to musicals simply because they can't suspend their disbelief enough to wonder why all these people are singing rather than trying to find a solution to their problems. But I think every person on the planet loves a good spectacle, and you can't help but just feel amazed at the talent that's shown on screen here. Like, it's really quite impressive.
Completely agreed.
Jumping off of dancing, this is a serious movie. There's a lot of laughs, there's a lot of tears, and then there's a lot of weird stuff, but it's good weird stuff. Like, one scene that we thought was absolutely hilarious, well, maybe a couple scenes, were when the dancers of the troupe had to speak to each other through dance. So maybe one would be on one side of the fence and the other would be somewhere else, or they didn't want to talk while other individuals were around them. And there would be little scenes of them just freestyle dancing out in the rain, and subtitles would appear at the bottom of the screen. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it was just the right amount of silliness that the movie needed to bring a sort of reprieve from all the heavy tones that we were being bombarded with. I thought it was great.
Yeah, for sure. I just had a thought. I think it's really interesting how people often say, oh, music is the universal language. I think a lot of times art in general is a universal language, and this movie shows that because it brings together 3 different languages and they can all kind of meld together and create a cohesive dance crew. Finally, I want to say I forgot how beautiful this film looked. There was so much attention to detail in both the sets and the costuming, and from what I understand, the movie was historically accurate.
Yeah, it's quite impressive.
The sets are based off of an actual prison camp, and the pictures I saw were crazy close. And the costumes also looked great. They looked so good. The hair, the makeup, all of it, very, very impressive. A lot of work was put into the production of this movie.
Yeah, everyone looked fantastic. Absolutely. The final thing that I want to add is how much I appreciated Rogi-soo's struggle to live out his communist ideals while justifying his interest in tap dancing. There are plenty of scenes throughout the movie where he just literally cannot get tap dancing out of his head. There's even a character that tells him he tap dances in his sleep because he's so obsessed with it. And he's doing this at his own peril. All of his communist allies see the Yankees, as they call them, tap dancing, and they see that as a symbol of America, a symbol of the evil capitalists. And I feel like that gets to the main profound message of this movie. In a lot of Western media, there's a very clear good guy and bad guy. Capitalists are always the good guys, and communists are always the bad guys. It's not so in this movie, which I really appreciated. It shows both ideologies as if they're 2 sides of the same coin. The communists and the capitalists are both willing to do whatever it takes to maintain order, but unfortunately it comes at the expense of the individuals who are suffering in the POW camp. And I think the movie is really trying to get across that ideology does not matter. No matter what another person may think, we may disagree on a lot of things. What matters is people and the humanity that we can see in each other and how important empathy is, especially in the polarized world we live in today. And I just feel like that's an incredible message for anybody. It's just a reminder that your neighbor isn't as different as you. They're just another person going through their life, and they're just as important as you are.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the finale of the movie, when everyone comes together and they perform, and you can see that Gi-soo has finally decided that he's not going to be chained down by the expectations people have of him. You can see how free he feels dancing, you know, for what is his last time. And I think that it's a beautiful but very, very sad picture by the time you get to the end of it.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? This movie really keeps you on your toes. It is absolutely tense. Because, I mean, I feel like throughout the entire movie, until you get to the very last scene, you don't know if Rogi-soo's actually going to stick to his communist ideals or if he's going to pursue his passion. You can't really get inside of his head. There are some scenes where clearly he wants to pursue it, and other scenes where he wants to stick to what he has essentially grown up with. It's just masterfully done.
Agreed. Anything else you want to say you like?
I don't know. Honestly, this movie is just absolutely fantastic. I mean, you remember, once we finished the movie, I was silent for like half an hour, and I actually had to go take a lap just to calm myself down. Like, it is such a masterpiece. I haven't felt this strongly about a piece of media in a really, really long time. So I definitely recommend it to anybody. I've been screaming its praises to the high heavens to anybody that'll listen to me.
Very good, very good. All right, quickly before we wrap up, let's talk about some things we disliked. On a technicality, I'm going to put this in the dislike section, but I really do love this movie, and I have very few nitpicks about it. This is obviously a war movie, so the themes are very heavy, and I don't want the beginning's mostly lighthearted nature to fool anybody, because it gets real heavy fairly quickly, but there's still enough levity sprinkled in throughout to not make it just a torture fest for whoever's watching.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I can point out is that some characters can come off as a little two-dimensional, but at the same time, they kind of serve their purpose. I feel like you see that for the most part on the American side of the conflict in this movie, but there really isn't much you can do with cranky, hot-headed commander guy, you know. He wasn't a bad actor by any means, but, you know, once again, he's there for a purpose.
Agreed.
So I have 2 dislikes about this movie that aren't really the movie's fault. Number 1 being, this movie didn't get enough attention. It did not get the press that it deserved, because holy cow, once again, this movie's incredible. But number 2 is probably on the fault of the streaming platform that we viewed it on, because all of the subtitles were available in Korean, for which I'm incredibly grateful. But at the same time, there were no subtitles for any of the English-speaking actors in the film. And occasionally there were moments where we were just sort of like, huh? What'd he say? What's going on? So we unfortunately had to watch the movie in a quiet environment, so that could have been on our side as well. But sound mixing in the movie is absolutely great. Yeah. But then I'm also thinking about deaf people who should absolutely see this masterpiece and won't be able to understand the American actors. So, and I think lip reading only goes so far. So whoever it is that's dealing with subtitles on that platform, they got to step their game up.
We watched it on Amazon. It's free in multiple places. I think it's also on Tubi and Viki, and it's on a lot of different things for free. However, I think that the subtitles are the same across the board, and it is so frustrating when they only subtitle one language and not the other. And that's what they did here, as you were saying. So I think regardless of where you watch it, you're only going to get subtitles for the Korean and not the English, unfortunately. All right, my last dislike is that the movie is a tad too long. I wouldn't necessarily cut any scenes out, but there comes a point about 3/4 of the way through that I do think it starts to drag a little bit. It does pick back up for the climax of the movie, but I do wish it was streamlined ever so slightly.
Yeah, I think the filmmakers even caught that themselves, because maybe about 3/4 into the movie, there's just a lot that's happening all at once, because you're just enjoying all the tap dancing, and it's like, communists, insurgents, everyone, it all just comes out really, really fast. But then eventually, after all that's over, they really find their footing again, and the last half hour of the movie is just wonderful. It's absolutely spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Typically, at this section of the episode, we would talk about original soundtracks, and given that this was based off of a musical, you would think that some of the songs would have crossed over, but like we said, no crossover of music. I did find a blog post that had a video of one of the songs being performed, and it sounded like your regular musical fare, nothing too out of the ordinary. So those exist if you want to go and find them, but otherwise, the movie just used like a Beatles song here, a David Bowie song there, and that's about it in regards to the music. So, those were our thoughts on Swing Kids. Thank you, Cass, for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
You're actually the first Sundae significant other to make an appearance on any of our content, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
It is sincerely such a great honor. This was great.
You're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, then please make sure to rate, subscribe, follow, and tell your friends about us. If you want to interact with us or just see more of our content, then you can follow the links in the description to our website and social media platforms. More single scoops are coming your way soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Later. Were you making fun of me, baby?